Good afternoon, my name is Megan Schwing and I'm presenting my critical assignment which is focusing on teacher collaboration through technology for inclusion of K through 2 students with reading disabilities. This is my abstract. It's just stating that the purpose of this research was to look at ways that technology can better reading instruction for students and can better reading instruction for teachers and how teachers can work together to use that technology in their classroom. My introduction, the reason this is so interesting to me is I'm a first grade teacher and I'm a first grade reading teacher. I work constantly to look at new ways for students to learn to read, new ways to use technology, and new ways to work with other professionals. I am also a one-to-one technology teacher, meaning I have one-to-one technology in my classroom for each of my students. I've also been an inclusion teacher, so this project was really interesting for me to learn new ways to use technology and new ways to work with others to better for the needs of my students. I decided to begin by outlining the importance of reading instruction. As educators, we know that the better students read, the more successful they will become in the future. Some of the important things that students need to become better readers is they need to have phonics, phonological awareness, they need to have sight word recognition, they need to read with fluency, and they need to comprehend very well. These are all very important things for students to know and for teachers to focus on during reading instruction. Miller and Spicegood wrote an article that I outlined that I thought was very interesting because it gave 5 important factors for a co-teaching relationship. It gave 7 important factors for a co-teaching relationship, and I just wanted to outline those really quickly because I felt like they were so important. And those are knowing yourself, knowing your co-teacher, knowing your students, knowing your curriculum, knowing the best instructional methods, using co-planning time wisely, and progress monitoring. I go into detail more on my outline and on the PowerPoint for these, but I felt like they were extremely important because having a good, strong co-teaching relationship is an important part of working better for your students. All right, reading instruction in the co-taught classroom, what does that look like? Well, we know that that can look like many different things. There can be whole group, there can be small group, and we've learned in class about the co-teaching strategies that we use as teachers. It's very important for teachers to work together and to have a very professional but very good working relationship with each other in order to better provide for their students and to meet their students' goals, especially students with mild and moderate disabilities. We know that those students usually have IEPs. It's important for the teachers to be up to date on those IEPs and to make sure that they are meeting frequently to discuss students, to discuss progress monitoring, and to work together to use that reading instruction in the classroom. They need to make sure they're providing support for each student together and working together consistently. All right, student motivation. One of my articles outlined a study in student motivation. They decided to follow these students for 18 weeks in a school in the Midwest, and they decided to look at these students and see if they were able to increase their motivation. There were 2 sets of students. One set of students had mild to moderate disabilities and were labeled as special education students. The other set was not. They were considered average. So it was interesting to find that and the study is from Mioglu and Wilkerson. It was interesting to find that the students with disabilities, the students that were struggling readers, had decreased motivation throughout that 18 weeks, while students that were not struggling readers really had either no change in motivation or a slight increase in motivation. This is very important. I labeled this a teacher's duty because without student motivation, without student work, and without teachers encouraging students, they will not be willing to read. They will not be open to reading and understanding what they are reading. So I felt like that was a really important part to mention because there's no reason to introduce technology or to introduce new reading strategies without your students fully being motivated to learning how to read. All right, the advantages of technology in a co-taught classroom. Like I mentioned earlier, I am one-to-one, and I recently became a one-to-one technology classroom, and I have learned many different things about technology, and there are so many advantages. The articles that I've outlined also mentioned many advantages to using that, especially with reading instruction. And it mentions that in the 21st century classroom, you will find technology. the main points that I would like to mention for these advantages are new reading instruction for students. Students can interact, they can engage, they can click, they can play games that help them learn how to read. I think it's also important to mention that two major advantages are progress monitoring and assessment. Co-teachers and, well, any teacher, general education and special ed teachers, can work together to look at progress monitoring data to better differentiate for their students. They can also look at assessment data. They can group that, they can understand what they need to do next or how they need to better serve students that are struggling. Those are major advantages in the classroom. Another article I read highlighted e-reading technology, which is very interesting because it helps students become better readers using different forms of technology, which I'll go into further. All right, technology and reading instruction. Here are some ways. On this side are some of the technology I've studied in these articles, and over here are some ways that these can benefit the co-taught classroom. So I mentioned e-reading technology. This is things like iPads, Kindles, things where students can interact. These can better readers because they do provide text-to-speech, and they can have digital activities. So for example, a student can click on a word and it can help sound out the word, which will better help the student understand. There's a program called Reading Cast where students can capture content and capture audio on a Word document, and the teacher can go back and listen to that audio. This will help the teacher better differentiate students. They can listen to students read, and the article mentions that with bigger class sizes, teachers don't have time to sit down and listen to every student. So this is a good way for the teacher to do that and make sure they're meeting all of their goals. Video recording can be a very useful tool in the classroom. Students can listen to themselves read, teachers can listen to students read. It can also increase motivation greatly to have a student reading a text, to listen to them read that text, and to have them listen to reading that text, because it shows that they can do it. And as we stated before, student motivation is very important. And another is the digital book talk method, which means students can create their own movie trailers for a book. And this, again, talked about increasing motivation. This is a great way for a student to become extremely interested and to become invested in the project. They read the book, they decide they want to present it to the class, and they create their own trailer. This will increase motivation, and it increases the comprehension of the story. All of these are very good for students with disabilities because you can differentiate these in many different ways so that the class is still doing the same activity, but your students are meeting their goals for their specific disability. All right, classroom management, okay? One of my studies warns that educators need to be mindful of the fact that technology can be a great resource, but technology is not always right for every student. There are different methods that can be used for each student, and it's important for teachers to know those methods, okay? The big factor in classroom management with co-teaching and with technology is knowing your students and knowing your technology. It's important for teachers to understand that each student will work differently and that technology, while it's great, has its limits, and we should be able to understand what it is asking for us to do and how to use it correctly in our classroom. All right, progress monitoring and assessment. As I mentioned before, a great benefit of technology is teachers using progress monitoring and assessment. It definitely gives us better ways to look at data, to assess data, and to move forward for our students. Miller and Spicegood again add that it's important for teachers to meet frequently to review that data, okay? But assessment and progress monitoring is definitely better used with technology. Teachers can communicate through that technology, they can talk about that data, and they can understand it better. All right, integrating technology as a whole. On this side, I decided to just go ahead and kind of summarize some of the technological points that we've talked about so far. We talked about reading cast, video cameras, computers, e-readers, and programs for assessment and progress monitoring. Throughout this research, we have learned that reading instruction and technology do work very well together, and they work very well together in a co-teaching classroom as long as the co-teacher and the general ed teacher have a very good working relationship. Technology, reading instruction, and inclusion better together. Throughout this research, it has become apparent that technology and reading instruction work very well together. those can be enhanced by having a wonderful inclusion classroom and a great relationship between a general education teacher and a special education teacher. You'll notice on the bottom of the slide I outlined different ways that each article decided that reading instruction and technology are working well to forward students in the classroom and to help students meet those goals. In conclusion, I added that understanding your curriculum, understanding your technology, and understanding your work as an educator and with your co-teacher is very important. And if you have these 3 things set, you will definitely help students succeed. Here are my references that are listed throughout, and the links you are able to click the links to link to each article. I want to mention that I know it's difficult to see in here, but when you see my PowerPoint, I'm hoping it will present well. Thank you very much. This has been Megan Schwing for my Special Education Critical Assignment number 2 class.